Welcome to Have You Read It, the channel where we bring books to life, one summary at a time. Today we're diving into Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s controversial book, The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. This is a deep dive, and it's going to be a long one. We're aiming for at least an hour, so buckle in. This book is not just a biography. It's a very critical, meticulously sourced, and often shocking account of Dr. Fauci's career, his influence, and the potential consequences of his actions. The book sets the stage by describing the state of the world in 2020, painting a picture of collapsing liberal democracies and institutions seemingly turning against the citizens they were meant to serve. It immediately positions Dr. Anthony Fauci at the heart of this global upheaval, claiming he was the dominating figure who set the course for the U.S. response to COVID-19. RFK Jr. frames this as a personal journey to understand how these trusted institutions could seemingly betray the values of freedom, health, and democracy. He emphasizes his own background as a Democrat, with a long family history in public health and friendships with figures like Fauci himself. However, he states he's been disappointed by the events that had transpired. The book's dedication indicates the author's position in the controversy. Dr. Fauci's opinions are not universally supported, and the author dedicates the book to the scientists who champion evidence-based science and ethical medicine. The book claims it will expose the complex web of connections between Gates and Big Pharma, and many of the most important players that were responsible for seeking to implement global tyranny and profit enormously from the propaganda behind the COVID injections, masks, and lockdowns. The author's stated purpose of writing the book is to trace the rise of Anthony Fauci from a public health researcher into a technocrat, while exploring the financial control over the media through advertising dollars and the systemic corruption that has led to stagnation of biomedical science. The author notes that blind faith in authority is a function of religion, not science. The book then immediately moves to a condemnation of Dr. Fauci's pandemic measures, and the author calls into question several aspects of the COVID-19 response led by Fauci. First are Dr. Fauci's science-free medicine arbitrary decrees, which consisted of mandatory masking, social distancing, quarantining the healthy, while instructing COVID patients to return home and do nothing until difficulties breathing sent them back to the hospital for intravenous remdesivir and ventilation. The author points out the policies resulted in by far the most deaths and one of the highest percentage COVID-19 body counts of any nation on the planet. The book then goes into more detail on masking and the claims that there is a lack of scientific backing for masking mandates, including emails from Dr. Fauci himself expressing doubt about mask efficacy. It says there is also evidence of harms associated with masking. The book claims that mask mandates did not have any effect on case rates. It mentions Dr. Gottlieb admitted that the 6-foot distancing rule was arbitrary and not, after all, science-backed. The author also questions the quarantines of healthy people, counter to WHO's pandemic protocols, and the WHO appealing to world leaders to stop using lockdown as a primary control method because it makes people poor. The author goes on to claim that Dr. Fauci expressed a belief that post-infection immunity was likely, but never discussed it, and instead promoted the inoculation of Americans with vaccines. The author cites Fauci's little perjuries about masks, measles, mumps, herd immunity, and natural immunity, attest to his dismaying willingness to manipulate facts to serve a political agenda. The author expresses that the blatant and relentless manipulation of data to serve the vaccine agenda became the apogee of a year of stunning regulatory malpractice, and questions the accuracy of data on infection and fatality rates. The author describes ways it felt the CDC had tried to manipulate the data and states that all the mistakes were always in the same direction, inflating the risks of coronavirus and the safety and efficacy of vaccines in order to stoke public fear of COVID and provoke mass compliance. Some examples the author cites include the CDC's selective protocol changes for completing death certificates and the misuse of PCR tests, The narrative shifts to early treatment, with the author noting the high regard that many medical professionals had for the practice. Yale epidemiologist Harvey Risch is quoted stating that, "Unless you are an island nation prepared to shut out the world, you can't stop a global viral pandemic, but you can make it less deadly. Our objective should have been to devise treatments that would reduce hospitalization and death." The book then claims there were safe medicines that would have prevented hospitalizations and saved many lives, but Dr. Fauci and pharma suppressed those treatments in favor of mass vaccination. The author also reports that there was record-breaking speed in terms of treatment. A high-quality trial based on an initial Greek trial, the Canadians came on with colchicine. The Chinese published their own early treatment protocol on March 3, 2020, using many of the same categories of prophylactic and early treatment drugs: chloroquine, a cousin of hydroxychloroquine, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, antihistamines, a variety of steroids, and probiotics. The book alleges that all of these treatment methods have been deliberately and systemically suppressed. The book notes that Hotez has said that the U.S. should snuff out vaccine skeptics. The book contains various statements from expert scientists that show that they believe the policies put in place have resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Oliver Stone is quoted about Dr. Fauci, "Has American medicine truly become a racket, as corrupt as a mafia organization?" The book then makes the argument that this was done to prop up pharmaceutical companies that snookered us all with the promise of democratizing communications, made it impermissible for Americans to criticize their government or question the safety of pharmaceutical products. That during this time, the middle class was pulverized and billionaires gained immensely, and that some 493 individuals became new billionaires, and an additional 8 million Americans dropped below the poverty line. That economic and public health bureaucrats survive and flourish by achieving improvements in public health, and Dr. Fauci's durability at NIAID is a wake-up call. The author goes on to call Dr. Fauci's career a catastrophic decline in public health and allergic, autoimmune, and chronic illnesses in children, and has made Americans among the least healthy citizens on the planet. Next, the book claims that pharmaceutical companies are the root of Dr. Fauci's rise to power, as Dr. Fauci has given pharmaceutical companies the power to dominate the government and subvert our democracy. The book talks about hydroxychloroquine, and that Dr. Fauci sought to demean that drug and promote remdesivir instead, and that was about to be given emergency use authorization. The author calls the reader's attention to the fact that they can find updates, new citations and references, and new information about topics in each chapter on the Children's Health Defense website and URL. The book then goes on to talk about how the U.S. has been taken over. CEO Satya Nadella boasted that Microsoft, by working with the CDC and the Gates-funded Johns Hopkins Center for Biosecurity, had used the COVID pandemic to achieve 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months, and that the company's stock value skyrocketed. The book notes that the U.S. has seen a dramatic and steady erosion of constitutional rights and fomenting of a global coup d'etat against democracy, the demolition of our economy, the obliteration of 1 million small businesses. The next chapter focuses on an older medical crisis, and that Dr. Fauci's failure to achieve public health goals during the COVID-19 crisis is consistent with the disastrous declines in public health during his half-century running NIAID and has presided over the chronic disease epidemic. The book alleges that throughout his long career, Dr. Fauci has routinely falsified science, deceived the public and physicians, and lied about safety and efficacy. The author cites Rob Schneider calling Dr. Fauci this little Joseph Stalin of medicine. The book points to RFK Jr.'s claim that Dr. Fauci has failed as the government's AIDS coordinator. These allegations are detailed, including crimes against hundreds of Black and Hispanic orphan and foster children, cruel and deadly medical experiments, transforming Africans into lab rats for clinical trials, and investing in gain-of-function experiments. The book then moves into the dedication where the author dedicates the book to heroic scientists and physicians who have risked their careers, their livelihoods, and their reputations to champion evidence-based science and ethical medicine. John Abramson of Harvard Medical School has said that the first step is to give up the illusion that the primary purpose of modern medical research is to improve Americans' health most effectively and efficiently, and that the primary purpose of commercially funded clinical research is to maximize financial return on investment, not health. In Chapter 3, there is discussion of whether or not Dr. Fauci's greatest accomplishment is the HIV/AIDS drugs. In Chapter 4, the book covers Duesberg's theory. The book notes that it became a crime against decency to address anything that could be making gay men sick other than the virus. The book quotes Peter Duesberg saying that the FDA documents showed that scientists knew very well which patients were on AZT and which on placebo, that they were skewing safety results in AZT's favor to give advantage to the AZT participants, in addition to providing more support and care to the AZT side. Robert E. Wilner, MD, PhD, accused Dr. Fauci of using transfusions and other artifices to systematically conceal AZT's toxicity. The author then begins to question the HIV theory, noting how people with AIDS are excluded, those with it included. The book claims Dr. Fauci was called to a congressional hearing and admitted a lot of what the others said. The book calls attention to the claim that people saw there was lots of corruption, but never said anything. The book states, "So, if this is your motivation to tell everyone the truth and save all these lives, then it would all be in vain. The heroic healers and truth-tellers everywhere." In relation to this book reveals the complex web of connections between Gates and Big Pharma. It questions how Fauci and Gates turned the African continent into a dumping ground for expired, dangerous, and ineffective drugs, many of them discontinued for safety reasons in the US and Europe, and notes that during this time, Dr. Fauci began to grow influence within multiple organizations, including the Heroic Healers Honor Roll, where each of them has endured vilification, excommunication, delicensing, and censorship by the pharma cartel's captive regulators. The heroic healers chose to wager everything on their commitment to their patients, to uncorrupted scientific inquiry, and to the opposition to authoritarian COVID policies retractions, career and reputational injuries, and financial ruin, to protect their patients and nurture truth. In his book Author, Terry Michaels writes, Dr. Anthony Fauci seized an opportunity to create a multi-billion-dollar bureaucracy, distributing thousands of grants to seekers of federally funded research largesse, with a disproportionate to other diseases number going to HIV/AIDS researchers. After 9/11, Cadleck, it was designed to prevent a future pandemic. That was part of the goal, which is that it has now launched an industry where many will benefit, as the medical industry is now. Then there were those who would come to prominence when they had the chance, one who had been a whistleblower against Dr. Fauci. But there were also the cases where Dr. Fauci would use public support of something to do something else. After that came a period of time where more studies were being conducted with Dr. Fauci's name. That brought a variety of different people and sides together. His biggest thing was that Dr. Fauci would not discuss the case, stating, "I don't know what to say because I wasn't a part of the study." The book claims that the public may not know all that is going on in the studies, as well as Dr. Fauci's true reasoning for some things that he might be doing. To continue, what it says is corruption. The system allows pharmaceutical companies to systematically divert federal monies, the initial NIAID grant, to serve their own private profit priorities. It suggests that, instead of a robust process, it is about what is popular at the time and how it can help those in charge at the NIH. The book talks about some scientists, including Robert Gorder, that have raised concerns about the state of the health systems and medicine in the USA. The book talks about the early 1990s when a second trial had come up for the doctor. In the end, this had forced him to come to a stop. The book contains a quote about the public's opinion of Dr. Fauci. "I want to know if, in fact, what the real number of patients, if only I knew more patients with AIDS would have told a greater number of people." The book notes that there is a much larger retinue of thousands of lesser-known frontline medical professionals and PhD researchers who have also chosen to wager everything on their commitment to their patients, to uncorrupted scientific inquiry, and to the opposition to authoritarian COVID policies, and is dedicated to them. It also acknowledges the sacrifices made by some in preserving our own integrity. Now, to summarize the book's takeaways and heuristics. Question authority. The book emphasizes the importance of skepticism and critical thinking, especially when it comes to pronouncements from authority figures in medicine and government. The author suggests not blindly accepting information, even from those presented as experts. Follow the money. Pay attention to the financial incentives that may be driving decisions and policies. Look for potential conflicts of interest, especially between regulatory bodies and the industries they regulate. Consider all perspectives. Seek out diverse viewpoints and challenge prevailing narratives. Be wary of censorship or suppression of dissenting opinions. Examine data critically. Be cautious of manipulated or selectively presented data. Look for transparency and comprehensive data collection. Look at all-cause mortality. Don't just focus on specific outcomes. Consider the overall impact of interventions on health and well-being, using metrics like all-cause mortality. Be aware of historical patterns. Recognize how historical events and trends can provide context for current situations, including the potential for repeating past mistakes. Advocate for freedom of speech. Support open discussion and debate on important public health issues. Remember basic health principles. Don't neglect the importance of basic health measures like nutrition, exercise, and sanitation. Thanks for watching. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next book dive.